Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks to the two congressmen for being here and joining us today. Grateful for you all for being here. I want to start with the news of the week, the news of the day, if you will, on a couple of fronts. First, Speaker Johnson yesterday said the reason many people refer to the Bidens as the Biden crime family is because they were doing stuff behind the curtains. Whatever President Trump is doing is out in the open. They're not trying to conceal anything. I wanted to ask your views on that statement, whether it's about taking a new Air Force One from the Qataris, the president's family doing extensive deals in the Middle East for their own private business. Is that the standard, do you think, that should be applied? That as long as it's out in the open, that it's okay? We'll start with you, Congressman.
Well, listen, I have some concerns about an aircraft coming to the United States from the Qataris, both from a security aspect. Obviously, Air Force One has a very specific function, has things that it has to have on board. All the questions, too, of accepting gifts from foreign governments, all those ethical questions, I think all those are very, very pertinent questions that need to be answered. Those are things I think we all have to attain the highest standard, regardless of where you are, executive branch or the legislative branch. So I do think those are questions that have to be entertained and things that we as members of Congress have to address.
You think it's in the best interest of the country for President Trump to rethink that and just wait for the new Air Force One to come from Boeing?
Listen, I think there are a lot of questions. Listen, I understand his frustration with the delays in delivering an aircraft from Boeing. We're all frustrated by that. We watched that unfold. I do, though, think that you have to look at both. What can we do to accelerate? What can you do to push Boeing? And remember, there are certain requirements on that aircraft. I think we can debate what the requirements are. But there's also issues, too, with accepting an aircraft from the Qataris. So I think that Congress needs to play a role in that. And that question is a pertinent question. The ethical questions, the technical questions of making sure that it protects folks. Yeah.
You'd prefer them to wait for the American plane, bottom line?
Listen, I think probably in the end, I mean, you can look at both, but in the end, I think that they're well underway with the Boeing aircraft. Let's push the envelope to get those delivered.
Yeah. Congressman?
This goes way beyond an airplane. The president's got his, cryptocurrency meme coin, which is auctioning off. And no, I do not accept the premise that somehow if you show up with a gun in broad daylight and rob a bank, that's okay, but embezzling isn't.
The security camera was on, so it's okay.
Right. I mean, that's just an absolutely absurd claim. And let's also not move past the fact that the Joe Biden stuff was so well hidden that the Republicans could never come up with any proof of it actually having happened. So there's a little bit of a flaw in the theory there as well. Look,
we're going to get you the Jim Comer book to make sure that you're up to date on all that, Congressman.
This is the most corrupt administration ever. I mean, just openly taking money from wherever they can get it for personal use. And you left out the best part about the airplane, and that is that Trump gets to personally keep it when he's done with it, which is a part that ought to be X'd out of the whole conversation right from the start. I mean, this is really, really bad in terms of the integrity of the United States government.
Let's move to, and we haven't talked about the possibility of widening the Palm Beach Airport tarmac so that it can fit that plane down the road.
That'll be in reconciliation.
Yeah, right. FY26, right? So, it's coming up. Let's talk about staying on the news of the day. What's happening in Turkey right now? Vladimir Putin himself was the proponent of having peace talks in Turkey. President Zelensky then said, "Well, I'll meet you there," and basically called Putin's bluff. Putin apparently is not going to show up in Turkey.
Shocking.
Shocking. Now, President Trump has said that he'd be willing himself to go to Turkey, but kind of absolved Putin for not wanting to go if Trump himself was not going to be there.
Look, that's been the problem from the start in all of this. I mean, Trump put all the pressure on Zelensky and took all the pressure off of Putin. The signals that were sent in the first couple of months of this administration told Putin that if he just waits long enough, Trump and Vance will abandon Ukraine.
Right.
That was a complete mistake. He gave Putin a massive green light to keep fighting in Ukraine. And now Putin is like halfway through the intersection, and Trump's going, yeah, maybe we don't want that. So he's got to put the pressure on Putin and stop giving him all of these opportunities and all of these openings. Yes, we need a peace deal, the peace talks in Turkey, that's great, but Putin right now is simply playing with Zelensky, playing with Ukraine, and playing with President Trump. We have to show Putin, Trump has to show Putin, he's going to stand up against him, and that will force them to negotiate.
Congress, is it time for a new sanctions regime against the Russians to make clear that we know Putin is slow walking us?
Yes. Listen, Putin has shown, first of all, that he's not trustworthy. Second of all, that he's not serious about this. He's slow rolling this. He's, doing the bait and switch sort of thing. I think you have to be serious about this. There has to be consequences for him not being serious about negotiating to a peace. Listen, we all want peace, but we understand, too, that there has to be certain conditions, I think preconditions, to come in and even have that discussion. It's clear to me that Putin is not in any way, shape, or form serious. Right. There has to be some backstop of consequences to not do it.
So what is that?
Listen, I think on the economic side, a lot of discussion about what would that look like.
Yes.
Some folks have said, well, we need to take them out of the SWIFT system. Some say, no, you can't do that because of a variety of different reasons. I think there are things the United States can do to put the economic pressure on there. And then it's not just the United States doing that, but it's also the United States going forward with that and then making sure that others follow suit. Because what's happened in the past is the United States will do it and others don't follow suit. And then the magnitude of the sanctions get weakened because there are people that bypass it.
It's also about our support for Ukraine, though. Yes, you got to put pressure on Putin, but it's also making it clear that we stand with the 53-nation alliance that is defending Ukraine, and we are going to continue to train and equip them so that they are in a position to defend themselves. Putin's vision of a completely disarmed and vulnerable Ukraine as the end of this, we have to make it clear we will not allow that to happen.
From both of you, if there's no progress in Turkey toward getting any kind of a ceasefire, let alone a broader peace deal, should the Congress send a new suite of sanctions to President Trump's desk?
Listen, I think Congress should look at all the different options that are there on the table.
Senator Graham has a bill, I know.
Yeah, listen, I think it would be great for Congress to say, hey, these are the things the president needs to pursue as the next step, clearly because Putin hasn't come to the table in a serious way.
Okay. Let's talk about the other possibility of deal making that is obviously on the front burner right now, and that's Iran. Mm-hmm. Clearly, President Trump and his top advisor on every hotspot in the world, Steve Witkoff, want to get to some kind of an agreement on Iran. But a lot of folks in your party, Congressman, especially the more traditional hawks, are uneasy about an Iran deal because they're concerned that any kind of a deal could allow the Iranians to keep enriching uranium. Tell me what your red line is on any Iran deal.
Well, listen, I'm concerned right now with where Iran is with the amount of fissile material that they have and how close they are to be able to produce weapons. So I think any sort of agreement needs to be able to take away that ability. I don't think you can say, hey, it's okay to be where you are and we'll just take steps going forward. And then that has to be verifiable. What we've seen in the past is the Iranians have denied access to a lot of these sites. They've hardened these sites, which tells me they want to keep us from being able to see those sites or the international community from seeing those sites. So, I think you have to put a lot of pressure on the Iranians to be able to do the right thing, to actually take away what is now continuing to be a building capability there. And by the way, I think it's a great time to do that because I think internally in Iran, there's lots of pressures on Iran. They are at the weakest point right now historically than I think they've been in the last several decades with what's happened to Syria and others. I think what's happening in the Middle East too puts additional pressures on them. So I think now's the time to go in and say these are things you need to do. And if not, there are consequences to not doing those things.
Are you comfortable with what Witkoff and Trump are talking about right now?
I am. I think negotiating with Iran makes a ton of sense. They are at a weak point. We're in a position potentially to get a good agreement and avoid a conflict with Iran. I mean, look, we all know Israel is itching to attack Iran and just cut off their nuclear program, which could re-inflame the entire Middle East. So if there's the ability to talk that down. Now, there's all kinds of different pieces to it. The Syria thing. I'll say something positive about President Trump just for the moment.
Folks, you getting that?
Yeah.
Adam Smith is about to endorse President. No, I'm sorry.
It is good. It is good that they pulled the sanctions off of Syria to give Syria a chance to be stable, to make sure that Iran doesn't find its way back in there. Now, one big flaw in all this is getting Israel to calm down just a little bit. They're bombing and occupying territory in Lebanon in Syria, what they're doing in the West Bank, the fact that we can't get to a ceasefire in Gaza is placing the whole thing at risk at the moment. So we have to figure out some way to calm that down. But yes, we need to be talking, we need to be negotiating.
We're sitting here, it's May, we're approaching the summer. If we were to reconvene on this stage, let's say Labor Day, you think it'd be more likely that we'd have some kind of an agreement with Russia, Ukraine, or with the Iranians? Mm-hmm. Which do you think?
Good question.
Or neither?
Yeah, I would say neither at the moment.
Yeah, Congressman?
Yeah, listen, I'm going to be the optimist here and say that I do think that there's a better than 50-50 chance that we're able to get agreements there.
With both?
Yeah, with both. Yeah, I think so. Listen, I'm probably a little more skeptical on the Russia-Ukraine side, much more optimistic about Middle East. I like what's going on there to stabilize things. Listen, I think we're going to get an indicator pretty quick here in the next week or so whether Putin's really serious about this. And at some point you have to say, we've given Russia and Putin every opportunity to show they're serious, and now we're just going to say you're not serious at all. Now we're going to be taking the next steps. And it has to be with serious economic sanctions that have an impact on Russia and are enforced. What happens a lot of times is you do these things and then all the side steps actually continue to enable Russia.
Congressman Smith mentioned the Syria issue, and I wanted to ask you, Congressman Wittman, there was the picture of Trump shaking hands with the new Syrian president, who obviously has got some ties to folks who are not friends of America. Were you comfortable with the president shaking hands and appearing friendly with a figure like that who has ties to Al-Qaeda?
Well, listen, there's obviously some controversy tied with the new Syrian leader. I want to make sure that the Syrian leader demonstrates goodwill and that he's trustworthy in the things that are going forward. I don't have a problem with you giving that opportunity there and making that gesture. This is more of a gesture to say, hey, listen, we're going to give you the opportunity to show that you're serious about stabilizing Syria, that you're not going to be a haven for terrorist groups, that you're actually going to be a stable and thoughtful government. So I don't have a problem with giving that opportunity. Now, it's up to the Syrians now to show that they're serious about that.
Let's take a step back for a minute, because the president's speech the other day was significant, I think, and some of what he said was clearly aimed at remaking his party and sort of reshaping his party away from the George W. Bush era. He said the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built. The people of this region should chart your own destinies in your own way. We're not going to give you, quote, any more lectures on how to live. Now, obviously, he's making clear that he believes that the George W. Bush presidency of foreign policy was in hindsight, a failure, and the project of trying to remake democracies in the Middle East should not be our business. But I want to ask both of you, are we forfeiting America's role as a moral leader in the world by simply saying, have at it, folks. Do what you want to do over here. You want to have a bone saw and go and kill one of your dissidents? Have a ball.
There's two separate questions to that. I mean, one is, how involved should we be militarily in different parts of the world to try to move them in the direction that we want to move?
He's conflating both things.
Yeah, and I think without question, we need to be a little bit more circumspect about what we can accomplish in that regard. Now, it did strike me when he was saying, Saudi Arabia, you're doing great on your own.
Yeah.
Where would Saudi Arabia be if we hadn't shown up in 1991 and stopped Saddam Hussein from taking it over? So it's a balance, but there is no doubt that in Iraq and Afghanistan, we got overly ambitious and made mistakes. But the second and the key question, this really struck me actually when Chris Vance, I knew I was going to do that. He's the guy who ran against me like years ago. J.D. Vance.
Whatever happened to that guy anyway?
Yeah, I know. Not much.
What was your margin against him? 17?
Not important. J.D. Vance, vice president.
He still knows.
Went to Munich and finally said,
yes,
well, maybe democracy isn't such a bad thing. Okay? After sending all of these signals, we're going to invade Greenland, we're going to invade Panama, we're going to take over Canada, we don't care what you do in the world. Vice President goes to Munich the first time and lectures Europe about free speech while giving a massive pass to Putin. So the fact that we have a president in the United States and a vice president who don't seem to think that democracy, freedom, human rights matter at all is definitely the wrong signal to send to the world. There's a balance here. We can't enforce it at the barrel of a gun, as they say. But it would be nice if the leadership of this country said it matters at least a little bit whether or not you respect economic, political freedom, and human rights.
Should America still be trying to project moral leadership in the world, putting aside the question of military intervention?
Listen, I think an important thing to take away from what you saw the president do is that, he went to the mantra of President Ronald Reagan that we know worked, peace through strength. And what he is, I think, projecting is to say, listen, the United States has a role in the world. It has a role as a deterrent force. It has a role to deter the likes of countries like China in their malign influence around the world. It has an obligation to stand up against things that we don't believe in. Yeah. But as Adam said, it's not through direct conflict. It's through doing things that deter folks, whether it's economically or strategically. Listen, we have a role that we can play there. The challenge is for our nation is to be able to make sure we have the wherewithal to have a credible deterrent effect. And that's both economically and strategically. So that's some things that we have to work on that as Congress in doing things like modernizing our military. Adam and I have talked about in violent agreement on this that, we have to change our military. We have to change how we acquire things. We have to modernize. We cannot continue to pursue status quo. Status quo will put us in a bad place a decade or two from now. We have to change, and we have to change at the speed of relevance. And this means something today. Yeah. This is timely. We have to get this done. And to Adam and Chairman Rogers' credit, this year's NDAA is going to be groundbreaking with that.
So I want to come to that. But first, how do you square that circle of J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio telling our NATO ally Germany how to operate vis-a-vis the AFD in their country, and then Trump himself saying to Saudi Arabia, no more lectures on how to live? Doesn't seem exactly consistent.
Yeah. It's not. I think it's the short answer.
Yeah. Yes. Listen, they obviously they both have different ideas about things. They're expressing those ideas. That's part of what happens in every administration. So I don't get too deep in the weeds about every word that they say. Sure. What I look at is, what are we doing as a nation collectively, executive and legislative branch, to really have an impact on where this nation needs to be, not just now, but in the next decade.
And I think it's really important. I mean, this is the step that we're taking. We're in the post-Cold War world. We are not going to be able to control world events as much as we have in the past. But that doesn't mean that we just pull back and say anything goes. We have to figure out how to be more smartly engaged and involved. And that comes down to also, what is our defense budget? What is our federal budget? All those different pieces. But I am worried that the signal that this administration is sending is very much radically in the other direction and will create more conflict. If you tell the dictators of the world, take what you want, we don't care, that is going to have a negative impact on global security.
Let's talk about what's happening now with the defense budget. The House Armed Services Committee is doing a plus-up of $150 billion for this fiscal year. Yeah. What statement does that send, do you think?
Listen, I think it sends a statement to the rest of the world, to our defense industry, to the nation, that we're serious about modernizing our military. It's not just $150 billion, but it's what are we going to do with that? Are we going to, restock our weapons magazines? Are we going to modernize? Are we going to do things to make sure we can counter what we see happening around the world? Things like the emergence of drones. Are we going to do things not just with the exquisite platforms like ships and aircraft, but are we going to do things to provide mass at a pace that deters China? And accumulating mass quickly is going to be things like attritable platforms, expendable platforms, and doing things quickly and less expensively and more efficiently, and utilizing technologies and allowing opportunities for small startup companies that are really innovators and creators that have the technology that is going to be the purview for us to be able to deter the adversaries. How do we make sure they have a door into the Pentagon?
So let me just say, I am less concerned with how much money we're spending than with how we're spending the money that we have. And I don't think we've spent enough time focused on that. And reforming the way the Pentagon does that, I think the Armed Services Committee, Rob's absolutely right. We are in complete agreement. We want to reform the acquisition process. We want to put ourselves in a better position to produce things. But how is the Pentagon going to do that? Are they going to reform and spend money in a more intelligent way? And I'm worried that so much of the reforms in the Pentagon right now are focused on sort of this cultural revolution of which books to ban and which words we're not allowed to say, firing people who aren't loyal, as opposed to focusing on really modernizing the military and doing what Rob just said. I mean, that's where we need to get. So I'm worried about how the Pentagon is taking it. versus what we are doing on the legislative branch to try and reform it.
Now, it does sound like one of the promising elements, though, is what you mentioned, Congressman, which is acquisition reform. And there is some bipartisan consensus
100%.
on that, right, Congressman?
Yes, there is. Listen, to the chairman's credit and the ranking member's credit, we are going to have a standalone bill this year that I think is going to be transformational with acquisition. And it is, instead of being put into the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, is going to be put into this bill. So I think that sends a clear message that this is kind of the Goldwater-Nichols moment for acquisition reform.
Let's end with something that I know matters quite a bit to both of you, because in part of where you are from, both of you come from districts that have a shipbuilding heritage, a port presence, obviously, a Tidewater, Virginia, Seattle, Washington. The Chinese are kicking our ass, frankly, when it comes to building ships. How urgent of a problem is that? And are we now at the point where it's getting to be too late to catch up?
I think it's really urgent, and it goes beyond shipbuilding. It's the defense industrial base. It is our ability to build at scale the equipment we need, whether you're talking about munitions or ships or planes or whatever it is. We need to ramp that up. That's part of what we're working on. We visited a great company, Saronic, down in Austin, that's cranking out unmanned surface vessels at a rapid increasing pace. I think we're making progress. The one piece I'll say, and I'll turn it over to Rob because he's got really great ideas on this, we need to work with partners and allies. We are not going to be able to build everything we need on our own. We need partners and allies, maintaining those alliances, not offending all of them, and making sure that we can work together to build the equipment.
To accelerate the shipbuilding.
Yeah, well, shipbuilding and a whole bunch of other things. The AUKUS deal is a huge part of this.
What keeps you up at night when it comes to the Chinese? Is it the disparity in shipbuilding?
Listen, that's one of the big things, what they're doing in a lot of other realms. But think about this. Today, as we speak, the Chinese have 238 times the shipbuilding capacity of the United States.
Say that again?
238 times the shipbuilding capacity of the United States.
How is that possible?
It's unbelievable. Well, because we've allowed our shipbuilding capacity to atrophy, they have put theirs on afterburners. So what we have to do is, listen, we're not going to make up that ground all at one time. But just as Adam said, we have to look at all the different ways to be able to do that. Certain construction is very important. Nuclear submarine construction is very important. But when you boil all this down, we talk about the industrial base. Adam is exactly right. But even more fundamental, the industrial base is workforce. I tell folks the top three issues in shipbuilding are workforce, workforce, and workforce. You've got to generate the workforce in order to do that.
Or apprenticeships. Exactly.
So we've got to take that first step. And Joe Courtney and I have talked about it. Joe's done quite a bit in that realm.
He has the Groton district in Connecticut, right?
And down in Newport News too. Right. But we have to do more of that. And it can't just be in those shipbuilding centers. We have to make it a single enterprise. Shipbuilding is not different than ship maintenance. It's not different than building the smaller platforms. All of those trades are interchangeable. Instead of looking at them in buckets, we need to say, how do we grow the entire workforce?
We're about out of time, but it sounds to my ears, folks, like the two congressmen from very different states, very different political backgrounds have found consensus in trying to build more ships to counter the Chinese, and not a great idea to have the Qataris send us a fully loaded Air Force One. Thank you, Rob Wittman, Adam Smith. Folks, give them a round of applause. Thanks so much. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Guys, thank you all.
Great job, Adam.
Great job.
Thanks, man.